We are just about ready to begin. For several talks preceding this talk, we have been focusing on soul and soul growth, soul development, and how it affects our evolution. Having focused so much on that one topic, it seems necessary to get ourselves reoriented to what we're doing overall. So to do that, we're going to do a little review. We are studying a mystical version of the evolutionary creation of our solar cosmos, in which we are very fortunate to participate. According to Mysticism, the creation takes place in 7 periods, and we are in the 4th. And in the 3 periods before this, which are called the Saturn period, the Sun period, and the Moon period, we have studied them in previous talks. Now, when we say Saturn, Sun, and Moon, we don't mean the planets. We mean qualities. Both the period and the planet Saturn draw from a quality that is Saturn, which is much more inclusive than either the planet or the period. Now, in these periods, the whole cosmos was more rare. In the Saturn period, it was as rare as a concrete thought. That was all the more dense it became. In the Sun period, it became as dense as a desire. And in the Moon period, it became as dense as the ethers. So we see that we are becoming more and more concrete. We are becoming more and more externalized. Now, the quality of the cosmos was different in each of those periods. In the Saturn period, it was dark and very poorly formed. In the Sun period, it was bright, it was lit up. In the Moon period, it was filled with light, but there was differentiation in the light into something like an etheric light. And there was more differentiation in form. In the Sun period, it was just a globe, a globe of light. In the Moon period, within this etheric light, there was a moderately formed center which had a quality of warmth, and there was a satellite within that etheric mist which rotated around that center. It is called the Old Moon in some versions of mysticism. In these periods, our life wave that is now human, went through different stages. In the Saturn period, we went through a material-like stage. In the Sun period, we went through a plant-like stage because we had a body capable of vitality and capable of growth and changing shape. In the Moon period, we were animal-like. That is, we had the capability of motivation, of feeling, and of motility that goes with it. Now, these are what we have gone through in the past. In recent talks, we have been talking about the fourth period, which is the Earth period. And we have said that the Earth period is central. It is central in that there is involution coming into the Earth period and evolution coming out of the Earth period. You might say that this is the axis of our creation. Moreover, it is central in that the main or central purpose, which is bringing the unknown into the known, is as deep as it is going to be. This is as far as we're going to penetrate. Now, for us as humans, it marks the end of involution and the beginning of evolution. Now, in the Earth period, we ceased to be creatures and we became creators. When we were creatures, other beings took care of us and guided us. As we become creators, we are responsible for other beings. In the Earth period, we have arisen out of various grades of unconsciousness to the waking human state of waking self-consciousness. This is again one of those central turning points that we have moved away from a collective, and we have become individuated to the point that the personality and the spiritual individuality are awakened. So we are more and more consciousness. In the Earth period, the threefold spirit that was developed in the first three periods unites with the threefold body, and it becomes an entity, a spiritual entity that has both life and form, that has spirit and matter. And it is a being that has material vehicles of consciousness. In the Saturn period, we developed what is now our physical body. We did that by being able to take on form. And the resistance that held the form together awakened the divine spirit, the power of the will to be. In the Sun period, we incorporated vitality. It was a vitality that was made of thought at that time. All of our bodies began as thoughts, and so while the physical body was then made of desire material, it was interpenetrated by an etheric, a vital body that vitalized it, that was made of thought. The next step after that, it was in the Moon period, we developed an emotional vehicle, a vehicle of desire, of motivation, and that also was developed as a thought to begin with. And it interpenetrated the vitality vehicle, while the vitality vehicle interpenetrated the dense physical vehicle. And so and in relation to the separation that was afforded to us in that animal-like state, we developed an individual spirit, a human spirit. Whereas in the sun period, when we were plant-like, we developed a life spirit, which is the spirit of pure imagination. So that at the end of the moon period, we were a threefold body and a threefold spirit. Now, in the earth period, we are developing a concrete mind in the concrete subdivision of the world of thought. And we are developing that right at what might be called the center of spiritual being. Above it are the worlds of spirit, and below it are the concrete worlds, the worlds of matter and form. And at that crux is where we develop the concrete mind. And we had an entire talk talking about the concrete mind being both a lens, a two-way lens, and a two-way mirror. This is a very quick review. If you want these things in detail, you can go back there. They are in the talks that preceded this talk. Now, what we're talking about, even the coming of the spirit by being focused through the mind into its vehicles, this is an enormously long, slow process. Now, the different vehicles that the spirit has to work with are at different stages of evolution. They are phased off. Now, the etheric vital body is pretty well developed. In fact, almost atom for atom, the etheric vital body, or at least the biological ethers of it, are almost an exact copy of the dense physical body. On the other hand, the desire body is not very well developed at all. It's still very young. It's only in its second state. At this point, it's just an ovoid, and it has a few centers that are vortices that are something like sensation centers, but it's not very developed. The mind itself is seen, if you see it or if you see the external effects of it, it's just seen as a light surrounding the head area. We are not yet able to think with our toes or our liver or whatever. All right. So, as the spirit enters its vehicles through the mind, it becomes aware of the worlds to which those vehicles correspond. That is to say, when it enters the physical world, it becomes aware of itself in the physical, it becomes aware of the physical body, and it becomes aware of the physical world, which is what we are doing with sense perception. So, this is where the evolutionary work begins. It begins when we interact with the worlds, and the worlds are an interface between the known and the unknown. We went into how the creative dream is projected on them, and as we, through that dream, begin to interact with the unknown, we spiritualize, or we bring the unknown into a known state. And the state between the known and the unknown, between matter and spirit, is called the state of soul, which we have been talking about for the last few talks. Now, since this activity of bringing the unknown into the known is something that is taking place through three vehicles on three different worlds. There are three types of soul. Relative to the chemical subdivision of the physical world, this stuff that our bodies, our outer bodies are made of, we produce conscious soul. And our work here in this world is to become basically, simply conscious. The interaction through the etheric vital body with the etheric subdivision of the physical world produces intellectual soul. And since the ethers are polarized, that has to do with an attraction-repulsion mechanism or an agreement-disagreement kind of understanding. And the interaction through the desire body with the desire world produces emotional soul. Clearly, the intellectual soul and especially the emotional soul are not very well developed yet. All right. We had then a talk about the absorption and assimilation of soul material, which we said takes place through the mind, and it is accomplished through a kind of remembering that is a rethinking and a spiritual awakening that comes when the soul material is processed. You might say that it is a series of aha moments. All right, that is a very quick review of what we have done. Now, we're going to go forward now in a way that's not very easy. And some of the things we're going to say along the way in this and the next several talks may stress your credulity. It does for me. There are some of the material that will be offered or will be shared that comes from reliable mystics. I only take tentatively, and I think that's a wise way. I take it tentatively because the sources have proven to be right on so many other recondite subjects that it's worth taking it in tentatively until it proves itself. Now, I admit that I might not completely understand some of the material that we're going to be talking about tonight and in the next several talks. In fact, you could say that about all of the talks. It's clear that I don't thoroughly understand everything. I would be some kind of great spiritual master, which I am not. It's not merely a matter of not having the intelligence for me to understand some of these things now that I don't fully understand. It is because they are in different dimensions and different directions of consciousness. And in some of those dimensions and directions, I haven't had enough experience to have developed the ability to understand them. So what I'm doing is I'm asking you to please bear with me in this. And hopefully we will get through it together and we'll all be enlightened a little bit more because of it. Now, even if this is unagreeable to you or incomprehensible to you, you might still get something of value out of it because there's so much in what we're talking about that, you know, it's rich with knowledge. All right, you might even get things from it that I don't. Now we're going to be discussing the birth of the solar system and the concomitant development of humans as humans that took place with the birth of the solar system and its becoming as it is now. So this is a rediscussion of the Earth period. Now, much of what we're going to say about the solar system does agree with the current science, and some of it does not. And everything that will be said may seem fantastic and irrelevant, but it's worth listening to anyway. Now, in previous talks on cosmogony, we have seen our solar cosmos as a whole. And those wholes were manifest in various globes. Each period had 7 globes, and they were formal manifestations of spirit in materialization. Now, in the moon period, there was some internal definition within the globe, especially the most dense globe. In the moon period, in that mist, there was a proto-water, you might say, that was a mist. In the moon period, there was a warm center. It wasn't defined in the same way that a globe is defined, like our Earth is defined, but it was roughly in that shape. And it was warm, and the mist circulated around that, within and, going in and out from that, much in the same way that our atmosphere has convection currents at this time. And there was also that old moon that rotated. It was a form in the mist of the mist, you might say, and it was a kind of evolution that was taking place. But in the moon period, it was not specific. It was not concrete. It was not definite, because that's what the moon period was like. Now, as we plunge into the ultimate frontier, which is in the chemical subdivision, we come to things that are discrete and that are very specific. And that's what our work is here. Now, in order to talk about differentiation, I'm going to use an analogy that has been used often to talk about light. In our case, we're trying to get to spiritual light, but we'll just talk about visible light that we see right now. If we have a beam of light and project it through a prism, it gets broken up into various colored rays of light. Some of them can be seen with the eyes, and some of them you have to have a higher etheric vision to be able to see them. Now, the colors were within the light all along before separated. Now, before going on, I want to clarify that this is not a theory of light. Mysticism has a different theory about the origin of light. What we're talking about now is we have light already, not talking about the origin of it, and we project it, how it can be broken into different things. We're not saying that this is how it was created. Similarly, or analogously, the light of spirit is projected, and it is projected into the concrete worlds, and it becomes separated. And it does this for specialization, because this is the physical world. This is the Earth period, and specialization for specialized reasons is why this all takes place. This is the time that is ripe for that. So spectral differentiation is in the solar system. Now, there is both agreement and disagreement about the birth of the solar system. According to material science, the matter that comprises the sun has always been in the cosmos. If you're a materialist, you have to believe that. You can't believe that matter is condensed out of cosmic root substance, because that's something that materialistic science doesn't know about. Now, according to materialistic science, for some unexplained reason, matter congregates at a source, and it draws more matter to it. And as it does, it heats up. And as it heats up to the point where it produces a fission, and when there is a fission reaction, a star is born. And the star spins and it projects light. Planets then are formed from the leftover gas from that beginning fission reaction. This is the way material science sees the solar system being born. And the planets are born at various differences from the sun. At one time, materialistic science believed that the planets were projected right out of the sun rather than out of the right out of the disk which produced the sun itself. Now, if you look at this as a merely physical process and not an inner process, the creation of the solar system is rather similar to that of mysticism. That mystics claim that the suns were, that the one difference is that the sun that we see as the central body, which is not the source of the planets, according to materialism, the sun was produced first, and the leftovers produced the gases and the space dust or whatever was left over from the creation of the sun produced the planets. In mysticism, it's just opposite. The planets were produced first, and the sun was the last thing to be produced. Now, we have to have some sympathy for the materialistic point of view, because most of us are in materialistic blindness. We can see this chemical, physical world, but we can't see the worlds that supersede it, the higher spiritual worlds, the worlds that interpenetrate it and that are more causal. And so you might say, let's give an image that describes what it is like if you're looking from the physical point of view. Suppose you saw a man who had a dog, and for that dog, he was building a doghouse. But further suppose that you didn't have the vision to see the man or the dog. All you could see was the material stuff. And what you would see would be spontaneously the pieces of a doghouse putting themselves together. and assembling themselves. You wouldn't necessarily know the purpose, and you wouldn't necessarily know what was behind it. That is what the view of the birth of the solar system is like for material science. Now, their observations are impeccable, and the conclusions that they come to from very limited information are astounding, that they can understand what they understand. It's just a fact that they can't see the spiritual side of it, and they're seeing the doghouse self or auto-assembling. All right. By the way, we're probably going to be very short tonight. These are things that I want to have short talks. I'd be surprised if it went over an hour, maybe an hour, 10 minutes. Now, there is a principle that we could have introduced a few minutes ago when we were talking about the moon period, but I think it's better to describe it now. Now, there's a folk statement that says, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. And so we're talking about getting out of the kitchen. The satellite of the moon period was formed because it couldn't stand the heat of that warm center. Similarly, the planets are formed and separated from the hot center for their own best development. This is a principle we want to keep in mind. Things are at where they are at because it is best for their development. This is a good thing to keep in mind. This is a universal principle. Anybody that we see in a position that they are in, if we remember to ourselves, they are in this position because this position is better for their development, we can better understand them and what they need for their development. And if we would like to help them out of the situation that they're in, that understanding of why they are at where they are at is very important. All right. All right. A few minutes ago, when we introduced the separative and the specializing nature of the Earth period, we used light and a prism to introduce the idea. It was that the different colors serve different purposes. It was used there to introduce an idea, and it wasn't meant to be creative. But that idea of one having within it spectral qualities is a true idea. It just isn't that it is a matter of the prism. It's a fact. There are experiments other than a prism that you can do to find out that in life or light there is a spectrum. Now, the life wave, or evolutionary wave, some people call it, is ultimately a wave of light. Our wave of light has condensed all the way down to being this material stuff, but it is basically a wave of life. And in this wave of life, there is a septenary subdivision. There are 7 distinct types of humans. This is the claim of modern mystics. we'll just take it as given, though at some point we will want to prove this for ourselves, and we probably will not be able to prove it until we are completely clairvoyant and have trained our clairvoyance the same way we have trained our physical eyes to understand what we see outside of us. So there are 7 distinct types of periods of humans. Now, in all of the previous periods, our human life, our life wave, which is now human, the conditions were such that we could all be worked on homogeneously. We didn't need to be divided. However, the conditions of the Earth period are such that it is better for the development of each type of person to have an environment that is most appropriate for it, so that it can get developed to its very best. Now, the 7 distinct types of humans are called the 7 rays. And now we get into a quagmire. Each ray evolves on a planet that is suited for that ray. So that there is, if there's something like a violet ray, it goes to a planet that is a violet planet. Now, we're not talking about color here, we're just using that as a means to distinguish a different quality. So, the planets are bodies of 7 great spiritual beings. They are planetary spirits. And each of those planetary spirits lends the quality of its character to that planet, and that becomes the basis of the evolutionary conditions for the humans and the other beings that are also evolving on that planet. Is there some relationship between that planetary spirit and the chemical components of it? Probably, but I don't know that, and I've never studied it. I've wanted to study it, but I can't give you information about that I don't have. Now, this is a very complicated subject. It's complicated because there is a quagmire of terminology. There are spiritual schools that have other uses for the term 7 rays. So, if you try to do cross studies between different spiritual schools, be careful, because you might be finding something different in terms of 7 rays. Then there's something else that you have to be even more careful about, and that is a father star. I'll tell you what is meant by, in the simplest way, by what I'm referring to when I'm talking about a father star. A father star is, you might say, the character of the core of your being that has been with you from the very beginning. When the individuals that have been with us all the way of our life wave as we've passed through the evolution, when they were differentiated, they were not only differentiated from all the other virgin spirits, they were differentiated in terms of 7 different qualities. And those qualities remain with you all the way through the evolution. But the catch is, you do not know your father's star until the evolution has been completed. Because that is when that father's star is fulfilled. Now, be very careful, because there will be people that will tell you what your father's star is, and they don't know. Only the very highest of spiritual adepts, and then after very, very careful investigation, can tell what someone's father's star is. But somebody who, for a pseudo initiation that they'll charge you anywhere from $50 to several $1,000s, they'll give you your father's star, don't believe them. You know, you have to realize that there are people, and sometimes some of these people even believe themselves in this, even though they don't have anything to back up what they claim to have and what they claim to know. This is as I understand the situation. I cannot say that I know it. I cannot look to the very core of someone's being and tell you this is their father's star. And, you know, now the father's star cannot be told astrologically. It doesn't work. You can learn a person's life ruler, but that's local to only one rebirth. The father's star is something much deeper and much more beyond that. Okay. Now, I bring these things up just so you're aware of them. They are not germane to what we're talking about in the birth of the solar system, except to say that the 7 rays are distributed among 7 planets, and that there are people of all father stars in all rays, meaning on all planets, on or in all planets. Now, okay, so we don't need to know this information to proceed forward with discussing what we're discussing this evening. This is going along really nicely. We're going to be done by 45 minutes, I think. Now, a few minutes ago, we said that mystics say the planets were not thrown off from the visible sun. They were thrown off within the spiritual sun. Now, this needs clarification. The spiritual sun is now a glowing sphere of spiritual light. Is it the same as the globe that we are now passing through? I can't say that I know that, but it seems likely to me, and it seems to make sense to me, without going into another side trip of saying why it makes sense. But I don't know if it is the cosmogonic globe. As I said earlier, this is a talk in which there are a lot of things, major things that I'm talking about that I don't know. I'm sharing what I have gleaned from information and what I have gleaned from pondering on information, not necessarily something that I know, because to know some of these things I would have to be a high initiate. Now I have to talk a little bit about something else, having talked a little bit about 7 rays or 7 states of differentiation within a light, whether it's a physical light or a spiritual light. Now we're going to talk a little bit about rotating spheres. As I understand it, this is a night where I was saying that a lot, not that I know it. As I understand it, creative activity and creative differentiation takes place at the pole. It takes place at the poles of any globular formation. We're going to talk about mystics claim that the differentiation of the planets began at the sphere of that globe. When that globe was defined, but it was not yet lit. It's described as being the dimly lit sphere, lit only by the light from the zodiac and the stars in the sky. Now, in terms of this principle, recent research indicates that species differentiation is greater at the poles or in the direction of the poles than it is at the equator. Now, it's likely that the differentiation begins toward the poles, and then it makes its way to the equator, and as it does, the form grows and becomes more defined. And we're talking about a principle, whether we're developing an animal species or whatever, whether we're talking about the development of a star, which we're trying to get to, or slowly get there. Now, one can see rotation, like the rotation of a sphere. You can look at it in terms of time and space. In terms of time, the Earth rotates on its axis in 24 hours. This is true no matter where you are. If you're on the equator, that it rotates in 24 hours. If you're at the pole, it rotates in 24 hours. But the linear speed of the Earth, by linear I mean any point how far it moves in space, in terms of space rather than times, is different. At the equator, I got the number here, any point moves at 1,037 miles per hour. At 45 degrees of latitude, it's 733 miles per hour. And if you're exactly at the pole, it doesn't move at all. If you're exactly at the pole, you are in the pole where things rotate around, meaning to say that as you approach the pole, the linear speed of rotation decreases until it approaches zero, if you want to use mathematic language. So from this we can see that the pole is more in touch with time, and that the equator is more in touch with space. I don't know, in touch isn't the right word, I don't know what to say. The space is more of a factor at the equator, and time is the only factor at the pole. Things become very different. You know, a day at the pole is a year for anyone else. You know, sunrise is in the first day of spring, and sunset is at the first day of autumn. All right. Now, we have seen in the past that time and space relate to spirit and matter. Therefore, the pole is more a matter of place where time is important, which means spirit is more important. And at the equator, matter is more important, or life at the pole and form at the equator. Now, one could speculate that creative impulses begin at the pole and make their way toward the equator. And you could say in this that the North Pole is like the head, and the equator is like the waist, and the South Pole is like the feet. Now, if you think about it, this is reminiscent of Dante in the Divine Comedy. Dante was aware of some of these things spiritually, and he chose to talk about them in a much different way. Now, since everything in space spins, there's nothing you can put out in the space. I can take the pen that I have in my pocket and I put it out in space. It would spin. It would have its own rotation. So what we're talking about here, this principle, the axis of rotation versus the circumference of rotation, we're talking about a principle that is very big, that relates to the whole universe. We're not going to talk about it in the whole universe. We're going to say that according to this, everything has meaning, and the place of anything in the universe can be understood in terms of its axis and its equator. All right, that's the end of the more speculative part, and now back to statements from mysticism, which may sound even even as speculative as the other. Now, there seems to be a principle of propinquity. We're going right back to what we said about the moon being separated, the old moon being separated from that warm spot in the moon period. Now, this principle that I'm calling a principle of propinquity goes something like, if the manifestation of something is of a higher spiritual vibratory nature, the objects that it inhabits separate themselves as an appropriate distance. That is to say, if it's too hot in the kitchen, you can go into the pantry. And if it's still too hot for you, then you can go into the living room, and eventually you end up outdoors. Meaning to say that according to your nature, the way you understand, the way you situate yourself in propinquity, in space, the way you position yourself is relative to your vibrational nature, your basic being. Now, this principle seems to be capable of being overridden. If a person is an individual, a waking, self-conscious individual, as humans are, and we have the power of will, we can situate ourselves closer to a higher vibrating source than would be normal. But eventually, that turns out not to be what happens. It turns out that it's most efficient, according to the principle of propinquity, to situate ourselves in an appropriate place because we can function the best there. Now, I'm not clear about the understanding of all of these things. I can't give you an understanding of why it is. I can say this is what happens. I'm hoping that maybe someone listening to this will have an idea. And if you do, be in touch with me. There is that on the panel when we look at the start of these talks, there's an email there that you can send in questions or comments to be made along the way. Even if you can disprove anything that is said in these talks, that would be greatly appreciated. Anyway, this principle that I'm vaguely calling the principle of propinquity applies to bodies in space. It applies to what is called Baudet's law of planets. And I have made a diagram, a table of Baudet's they don't call it a law, they call it a proposition. Okay. Whee! These are the planets: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, asteroid belt, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. If we take Earth as the standard and we say the distance of the Sun from Earth to the Sun is 1, then the distance of Venus to the Sun will be 0.7 and Mercury 0.4. Mars will be 1.6, the asteroids 2.8, Jupiter 52, Saturn 10, Uranus 19.6, and Neptune 38.3. Now, Baudet's principle is you start with 4, Mercury, the first one, and you make a whole series of 4s, and then you take, since Mercury is taken as the base, then you take 4 plus 3 equals 7, then you double 3 and you get 6, 4 plus 6 is 10, and then 4 plus 12 is 16, 4 plus 24 is 28, and you see it's very simple, 4 plus 48 is 52. Now, if we take these numbers that are according to Baudet's mathematical progression, this is the 3, 6, 12, 8, that's called an arithmetic progression. If you take these numbers, you see that the 4 corresponds to the actual distance, the 7, the 10, the 1.6, the 28, 52, 10. It holds up all the way out to Uranus, but when it gets to Neptune, it breaks down. So this is an indication that there is, at least for the solar system, there is a principle of propinquity, and the bodies set themselves in space in that way. And this is a, oops, wrong button. And this is an indication that bodies in space do set themselves up according to a principle. All right. We now have 2 principles to work with in describing the birth of the solar system. First, we have the principle of relocation from the poles to the equator that Creation begins at the pole, especially the North Pole, and then it formalizes and makes its way toward the equator. And the other principle that we're working with is a propinquity principle, meaning to say there is something like a formula according to which the planets themselves have evolved and been created, that they fit into that formula that we looked at when we looked at Baudet's principle. All right. The first principle, first planet, according to mysticism, that was thrown off was Uranus. And when it was thrown off, the the sphere that in which the solar system is formed was still dark. And it appears that it lit up as the planets were thrown off, but it was when the sun was differentiated that it was then that the system really lit up. All right. Now, the reason Uranus was thrown off, or the beings that were thrown off with Uranus relative to an evolutionary tempo, were very slow and very sluggish. As I understand it, this means not only the humans, but the animal likes, the plant likes, and the mineral likes, that they were slow and sluggish, and that they had to be at that great distance. This includes the human beings that were associated with Uranus. Now, this requires clarification, because people are going to, if a person doesn't understand or doesn't take thought, they're likely to say this is impossible. There cannot be humans on or in Uranus. Why not? Most people consider a human being to be shaped the way we are shaped, with a head and arms and a trunk and legs. That's not what a human being is. A human being is a threefold entity that can think, that can emote, that can grow and live, and that it can take form. That is the definition of a human being that we have been developing all along. Clearly, if you mean by a human being a body like we have here on Earth, not possible on Uranus, not possible at all. It doesn't have to be like a dense body for it to be a human being. Most likely, this is a speculation on my part, most likely that body would be composed of chemical ether and perhaps gas at the most, but chemical ether seems most likely. Now, such a body would be capable of interacting with the chemicals or with the minerals of that way, but it would be of that planet, but it would be in a very different way. Now, the big question is, what ray is associated with Uranus? I do not know. But again, I can surmise what seems to be true to me. It seems to me that it would most likely be at the blue or violet end of the spectrum, because we associate that with coldness and more torpid, slower things. I'm very tired. You have no idea what hour of the day this is being recorded at. So, the process was, at the pole, there is a spontaneous precipitation of chemical matter out of the ethers. And that chemical matter and the ethers that go with it makes its way down to the equator, and according to some principle that we don't know exactly, but that is vaguely hinted at by Baudet's principle, finds its way in the plane that is the ecliptic. That is that disk that surrounds the sun. Now, obviously, because gravitation is true, and gravitation is not the only principle that's involved here, but because gravitation is true, the positions of the planets as they condense out of the ethers and find their place in the ecliptic, at that equator, the planets are going to have to move relative to each other. And eventually, what Baudet's law is the final position of things. I'll talk about Neptune at another time, and I'll talk about the asteroid belt at another time, because I'm too tired to go into something that wild at this time. So at any rate, the positions of the planets, they move according to when new planets are born. This only makes sense. All right, this was the first setting apart of the first planet, Uranus. And now we want to talk a little bit, a very tiny amount, about the spiritual side of this. Because a lot of people that will be listening to this talk will be saying, but I study astrology, and Uranus isn't anything like that. In astrology, Uranus is a very creative, very quick to change, almost explosively changing. And that is not what is described here. But what we're talking about in astrology is more likely the planetary spirit and not the beings that are evolving. And it may only make sense that these very slow, backward beings that are associated with Uranus would require something of a very high vibration to promote their evolution. Just as we, when we're in the Saturn period, required beings of the highest nature for us to be differentiated and worked on. All right, so there is some kind of inverse relationship between the consciousness of the planetary spirit and the consciousness of the beings evolving on the planet. Now, this is as far as we're going to go tonight. Next time we'll talk about differentiate more planets and go into more principles that are involved in all of this. And I hope this has been instructional to you. There has been a lot of speculation, but I hope you appreciate the fact that in the speculation, you're trying to form ideas. We're trying to, in the same way that planets are precipitated out of a higher sphere, our thoughts are precipitated out of higher ideas. And when we're trying to understand what is behind the things that we see in precipitation, sometimes we speculate in order to get in touch with the higher things, as long as we don't think that the speculation is the reality. If we think the speculation is a reality without proof or something that verifies it, that's misleading people. All right. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. I did. I have always a great time putting these things together, and I'll see you in the next talk.